Okay, that's that. That ought to do it. Thank you.
Hello there. How are you?
Oh, we're good.
We're good.
Hanging in. Well, it's either the royal we or me and him. Whichever one you want to. Yeah.
To enter the
It is
calendar
we. Yeah.
for the state. Now, I personally think it's sometimes.
He's like sometimes.
There's a calendar
Oh, it's funny.
that has some of the bells, but it's not exactly the same. Right there. But
Go running for
well, one data is this is like the coordinators to put in events around the state. All that kind of stuff is making available. We can get that done. And that's all, that's, you know, the only question then is like, how is the data delivered? And usually it's based on, in a spreadsheet that you can write down the board. Right. Right. And they have more advanced tools. Knows whether. But one thing's for certain, it's going to be is like holding each other and it's like how much are we so I don't know what to expect. I'm not expecting much.
That was my first spell.
It's like,
No, that's fine. As a matter of fact, when I'm thinking, you know, I just need a couple other ones set up. So, yeah, we'll leave them on the wash.
That would be a good idea. I may want to walk through there. Go for it.
Where are you taking that chair? I know. We're making a news table.
Phew.
Can I have one?
You can have this chair if you want.
Are you going to be standing up?
You can have this one if you want it. We'll be socializing a little bit. You must be hungry. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I got my head in the camera.
Oh my goodness.
That's all good. Is that staying on this table? I think for right now it's good. Are you going to eat another cherry?
I'll get one. That was a job. Went to Gordon's Foods, ordered our ham and turkey, sliced up. That's over there about half a mile. Then come down here across the street to Brands. There's a restaurant right across the street. And have them grill them. I didn't know they didn't sell hot dogs. Because I told Jim, I said, yeah. I told Jim, I said, let me get a couple Brands and see how much it costs for 150 hot dogs. Ready to eat. You know, heated and ready to eat. Without the buns or anything. They don't serve hot dogs. So, we got a hold of the owner of Brands. Called him. Said, told him the situation. Can you get us? Can we use your restaurant across the street to heat the hot dogs? Sure. Ask for so and so. So I went over. I got the dogs. I went over to Brands. Asked for so and so. Took him about 15 minutes to heat up 200 hot dogs. And here they are. Get her done.
Zero carb
Okay, I did my share. I had my 4 hot dogs. Only 4. The 2 were without buns.
Oh, very good.
I don't think there's any buns.
Yeah.
I'm looking for dessert. Up in Michigan, seafood lunch. Just started getting this email from Paul. Well, yeah. I didn't know where it was from, but it said hello, Patriots, so I just figured it was sort of connected. Who did I talk to? I said, no, it's more like around all French.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what we're trying to do with them is kind of get them to cut down on their rhetoric. I mean, most of them are younger group. For the most part, they believe similar to the way that we do, the way things are being run. Before the election, they were crazy. I mean, absolutely insane. Now, keep the energy going. Cut down on the rhetoric.
Sign up, you had to re-sign up for a new email list, and sign up for that just to see what it says, but for future reference.
Right.
So yeah, the tables worked out fine, I can imagine.
Oh, I got, no, I'm not. Got the plate over here.
Now the meeting's just getting started at the time I have to leave.
Oh, yeah.
Stick around.
Yep, it's running. Nobody's speaking yet. The card I got in there will pick up 2.5 hours of video, and this isn't going to last that I might go get another one. Yeah, but after that lunch I had today, I didn't have that much. So I knew we were going to be here, so I cut back on the lunch. It's running a little bit late. That's okay.
That's all right. As long as everybody's eating, nobody minds.
That's it. Nobody cares. I'm going to go get another dog. Another one now.
Well, that's the thing, without unless you have a popping
Did she say anything that
This is a better spot. This is a good spot.
somebody who is more along
Good.
You're working on it.
I'm working on it. Those things, it takes a long time to draw that flag on there, you know.
drying paper flag in his car.
Yeah, that's what he was laughing about. Gotta make sure I get him in the card for the next meeting, otherwise I'm gonna be a deep shit.
Right.
here.
Somebody had to do it.
Yeah, there you go.
It's a tough job.
Things I do for this group.
That's right. That's right.
Right.
Yeah, I haven't seen very many, but that's okay.
She's somebody that we might actually.
I don't think I could need my computer tonight. There's two others in the room.
Switch her mind a little bit. Not
Oh, you got them on the floor. Good.
We'll be starting in about 2 or 3 minutes, so you can start to collect the talk.
Did he say collect your thoughts?
Is that what he said? He has a lot of confidence in me that I can do that.
Well, okay, I just wasn't. And then the intent of
Number right next.
first we thought, okay, it's going to be open, but no, it's going to be closed, and then that's when we did that. And then we kind of opened it all again, and we never Well, that's good. So some stuff is not in the wash. Okay. No, I mean, I don't want to be in charge.
Cool, like, yeah, screw this over. It's like, like we're not going to get out. But then again, I'm sure.
Folks, for those of you who are sitting backwards, in the interest of your chiropractor, you may want to sit on the other side of the table. Or we have, certainly there's somebody who's a masseuse in the room, but if you wanted to sit in the right direction, you might want to do that. We start in just a moment.
Welcome to the Ottawa County Patriots Town Hall Tax Day. I hope you all had an opportunity to grab a couple of hot dogs and some chips and beverages. I believe the beverages are all not alcohol, but I did not check all.
Check mine, didn't mine.
I'd like to ask Jim Chiodo to lead us in a short invocation, and then I'm going to ask that Jim lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Jim, where
Heavenly Father, be with us this evening, and most importantly, be with the injured and those that passed away at the Boston Marathon, and comfort them. Be with the emergency crews, and let us put them first and foremost in our mind, and not who did it and what are we going to do about it. Again, we've already enjoyed a light supper. Bless that food to each and every one of us. And I'd like to acknowledge somebody who jumped in at the last moment. For those of you who weren't aware, we did have a little problem with the hot dog vendor, so to speak. At the last moment, I got a hold of Tommy Grand in Grand Rapids, and he just did a miraculous thing. We were able to get the dogs cooked right over here at the Holland brands, and they were great. And again, be with us this evening as we hear from our legislators. Guide us in our quest for information from our legislators, and bring your blessing upon all of us. Amen. Now we could rise as soon as the color guard brings in the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'm now going to turn the meeting back over to Mike, and he's going to retire the public for a moment.
Couple of announcements before we get into the main part of the meeting. For those of you who don't know, the Ottawa County Patriots are one of several dozen local tea parties in Michigan. Our principles are basically three. The first is fiscal responsibility. Second is limited government, and third is confidence in free market economics. And so you can see why we have been eager to sponsor this Tax Day Town Hall for the benefit not only of the constituents here in the room, but for our legislators as well. A little unabashed self-promotion. We are in the middle of a two-part series examining the connection between small farms and the growing footprint of government bureaucracy on those small farms. The movie that we're doing it in two parts. The first part we examined on last Tuesday. The second half of the movie we will be viewing next Tuesday. We're looking at this at the Howard Miller Community Center in Zeeland. And if you are at all interested in the intersection between small farms and government bureaucracy, I encourage you to join us next Tuesday at 7 p.m. In the Howard Miller Community Center. The discussion afterward will be led by Roger Victory, one of our legislators and one of our farmers, who will be. Roger, if you want to grab a hot dog, you're more than welcome to do that.
Sorry for my delay.
No problem. So again, next Tuesday at 7 p.m. in the Howard Miller Community Center. The second part of the Farmageddon movie, the intersection between bureaucracy and small farms. Both Amanda and Joe have some charts that they'll want to share with us, but before, concerning Michigan's upcoming fiscal year budget, but before they do that, I'd like to set the stage for a couple of charts myself. First, let me make sure we all know who the important people in the room here today. It's not me. Joe Hagan, Joe over here on the right-hand side here, Amanda Price, and Roger Victory. They're all good people. And they're all, usually people call them politicians. I want you to remember that as long as we have a democratic republic, we are all politicians. And it's wrong to use that word politician as a slur, okay, as a negative connotation. They're just more active than most of us in this country, okay, today. They put their heart and soul where most of us just put our mouths. So they need to be congratulated for that. And we need to strengthen the dialogue between ourselves and them to ensure that we stay a democratic republic.
Hey, thanks for being away.
First of all, Ottawa County. There are about 250,000 of us living in Ottawa County, divided up into about 100,000 households. The average household income in Ottawa County last year was $70,000. Okay, now that's if you add up all the household incomes and divided by the 95,000. But another way to think of that total number is to ask how many, half of the people in Ottawa County make $55,000 or less. And half of the households make $55,000 or more. It's the median income. That's what the 55,000 is. The total gross domestic product in Ottawa County is $6.5 billion. The tax base for the county is about $10 billion, property value-wise. Michigan, or Ottawa County, is one of 83 counties in the state of Michigan. There are 10 million residents in Michigan compared to the 250,000 that live here in Ottawa County. There are 3.8 million households. Their average income is $65,000, less than here in Ottawa County. And the median income in Michigan is $50,000, $5,000 less than in the state as a whole. The gross domestic product for the entire state of Michigan is $340 billion. Okay, now, if every county were as productive as Ottawa County is, then our gross domestic product would be close to $500 billion in Michigan. So we are above the average. The state of Michigan has 148 legislators. 3 of the best are here. Okay. It has 64,000 employees. Okay, so when we talk about the state of Michigan and its government, those are the people that make it happen, whether you like it or not. And there are a lot of things that we could talk about in that respect. But these are the people that are the effective board of directors for the institution of the state's government. Okay, so every year the state develops and passes a budget, and that budget, based upon the past, will be about $50 billion. $30 billion of that the state is going to raise directly itself by taxing, by fees, and so forth. 40% of that money, $20 billion, is going to come from the federal government with strings attached. Okay? The total outstanding obligations that the state of Michigan's government has incurred, and that's just bonds, the actuarial pensions and health care, and they expect that the people are going to live until 78 or 79, but they're going to pay their health care costs until they die and so forth. That's an actuarial liability. When you add that all up, the state right now has a liability of $125 billion. That's a significant amount of money. Now I was going to share with you some additional information, but Roger's going to do that certainly better than I can. So I'm just going to skip. I want to get to this chart because it's something of concern to me. It charts over the last 15 years what's happened to the revenues that the state collects. That's the blue line over the last 15 years. You can see, except for one little episode there, it's been trending upward steadily. And the red line is the amount of money that the state has accepted from the federal government. 15 years ago, it was relatively small. Now it's quite significant, $20 billion. So I remind you of those grants, those gifts, they come with strings. So, money is power. If we give more money to the government can do more for us or to us. And then we can do less for ourselves. When it comes to the money that the government in the state of Michigan spends, we have to ask who really controls it. As I've tried to emphasize to you a couple of times now, 40%, 4 out of every $10 the state of Michigan now spends comes from the federal government. So who really controls that money and who controls how it's used? Is government too big or is it too small? I think you have to have in your own mind a sense of that. A lot of people start not there, but with what do you want the government to do? Rather than asking, is the government too big already, or isn't it big enough already? You want to make it bigger. Also, we have to ask ourselves, is what the government doing the right priority order? And I think we'll have an opportunity to talk about that. I've asked Amanda to talk a little bit about the roads that need significant attention in this state, and Governor Snyder's budget includes a significant increase in expenditures for roads. And it also, Governor Snyder's budget also proposes how we can get that money to work on the road. And we'll leave it to her to expand on that. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn over the meeting first to Joe for 10 or so minutes to talk about the budget. Then I'd like Amanda to speak for 10 or so minutes on her perspectives on the budget. And then lastly, I'd like to have Roger speak for a few minutes, 10 minutes or so, on his perspectives on the budget. And then I'm going to reclaim the microphone and I'm going to be asking you folks in the audience for questions, or perhaps statements, to direct to the legislators. And we're going to do that until about 8 o'clock. And then at 8 o'clock, I'm going to ask each of the legislators, Joe, Amanda, and Roger, to summarize for us what they've gained from this meeting, what they've learned from this meeting. If it's productive at all, hopefully you will have all learned something about Michigan's budget, but as important, they would have learned a little bit of what their constituents are concerned about when it comes to the state budget. So, Roger, over to you.
I'm sorry, Joe. The other Joe. I have a PowerPoint that I apologize is going to take longer than 10 minutes. Just to carry you right now. But while Michael's doing that, I'll just kind of review where we are in the budget. The budget goes through the House and the Senate, through its subcommittees. I chair the Appropriations Committee on the House side. I have 29 people on the committee, and about 17 or 18 budgets. Senator added one this past year, so I always have a hard time remembering whether it's 17 or 18.
Where's the?
I'm
sorry.
You're good. The governor presented his budget on February 7th. Subcommittees, full appropriations have been meeting. Subcommittees reported their budgets out, and last week we spent Wednesday and Thursday approving those budgets in full committee. From the full appropriations committee, it will, a week after this, next week it will go to the full House for approval. Senate's roughly on the same schedule. After we pass out the budget, we'll have various amendments to it when it goes to the full House. Our budget will go to the Senate, theirs will come to ours. Typically, we reject those budgets on the other side because ours is better than theirs, right? And theirs is better than ours. So ultimately, they are resolved in the conference committee, joint agreements between the House chair, Senate chair, their vice chair, and one Democrat from each. So from there, we will really see what the budget looks like. We are still on track to have the budget done, we believe, by June 1. There are two big issues. One I think has been pretty well resolved, and then Michael talked about the road funding. I think that one is still potentially unresolved. So I'm going to just whip through these. I don't want you to take my comments as a statement that I think we need more. What I do want to prove or show is that although funding typically goes up, the state has really in the past years, somewhat because it didn't have money, budgets have been fairly steady in a lot of respects. I'm not advocating for more money. There will be areas where we can cut more, and that's part of the budget process. We, as a matter of fact, cut about $2.5 billion from what the governor recommended. So that will not be the final number. As I said, the process goes forward. There are three legs of the stool. It's the House, the Senate, and the governor. But I want to start. I'll do that later. I've got a few of the handouts, but I don't have enough for everyone. There we go. This slide, I just want to show you constitutionally what is allowed. I am not advocating that we do this, but you will hear Democrats occasionally. The first time I heard this was from the Speaker of the House back 4 years ago. I was not aware of this. But constitutionally, the state of Michigan cannot tax more than 9.5% of state personal income. We are currently about $7.3 billion below what is allowed by Constitution to tax. Nobody is advocating that we even begin to try to do that. We took a blip up here and crossed the line about 2000. I don't recall what that was. I wasn't in Lansing, wasn't paying close enough attention back then, but it was very short. And then you can see we were back here. We had a couple of, those were really the toughest years budget-wise for the state. It dropped, and you can see the first couple of years of the Republicans, that's increased revenue, and now we're back down to about 7.3. Well, that's 2015. This slide shows total state appropriations. the bottom bar here is general fund. Then we have restricted funds. I'll talk about that later. You see this little part that jumped in and disappeared? That was ERA funds from the federal government, additional funds over the first 2 years of Obama. And then you see here federal funds. Mike talked about that. That's where we've been seeing the steady increase. State expenditure growth. This is, we added this one today. This is an interesting slide. Michigan is dead last of the 50 states in growth in state expenditures. We're dead last in revenue increases, dead last in spending increases over the past decade. Michigan actually, South Dakota and Michigan actually went below the line. That means we were spending actually less out of general fund Michigan money than we were 10 years ago. You see way over here, we've got North Dakota, about 175, 180% increase. Alaska, huge increases, goes all the way down. Michigan was one of 2 states that actually went backwards in spending growth. Not saying that's a bad thing. You know, some of it was because, frankly, we didn't have the money. That was the lost decade. But the perception that state spending is out of control, you know, you got to couch it with that a little bit. School aid fund net revenue. This slide shows the school aid fund revenue is in actual dollars and adjusted for inflation. In actual dollars, we've seen a steady increase, but about the same as where we were in 2008. We're showing potential, or about a 2.7% increase over the next few years. And when you adjust for inflation, we are significantly below where we were back in '98. We had a few high areas, but still below where we were. That was school aid revenue. This is school aid appropriations. You can see school aid is made up of school aid fund and then general fund, general purpose contribution from the general fund. We get over here and you can see federal funds used to offset cuts. My little pointer's going to die on me. You can see the dark blue was federal funds. And then what I'm very proud of is those last 2 slides. It says OPEB pre-funding. You got one there? Great. OPEB pre-funding stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits. Now, Michael talked about that $125 million in general debts we have. I've not heard the $125 million. I think with the bonds. I'm sorry? Billion. I'm sorry. The number I've heard was 60 billion. Okay, I think I'm talking legacy costs and he's adding other things in. But we started last year of adding OPEB pre-funding, which basically means we're going to start paying down that debt ahead of time. If you think of paying your mortgage on an interest-only mortgage and you're not catching up, you're going a bit further behind, well, we said, okay, we're going to take that interest-only mortgage and we're going to start paying the principal on it. And we're going to start escalating that principal. We're going to take it from a 30-year mortgage to a 20 or a 15-year mortgage. So the 60 billion that I'm using, that number, on our obligations, we brought that down to about 40 billion. So we took 20 billion of obligations and said we're not going to, we're going to pay that off. That's what the pre-funding is doing when you look at the accrual basis of it. So, I'm very proud of what we did in the past 2 years with right to work. It was, it was right for the state. I'm even more proud of this. I think this is what is going to help our kids and our grandkids even more. Okay, that was school aid fund. This is general fund, general purpose net revenues. You can see also federal funds coming in, actual dollars going back to 2000. We about met it with the federal funds. We're back down below where we were in 2000. When you adjust for inflation, we're about, gotta get on my right page on my notes here. we're about $3 billion below from 1998 to 2014. So there again, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's a good thing. They're tightening their belt. Some of it is because Michigan just did not have the money. Okay, that was revenue. This is appropriations again. Very similar. You can see the ERA funds coming from the federal government. The first couple of years of Obama, that has gone away. Here we are back with the OPEB pre-funding. General fund money down from 2011 to 12. Went back up in 2013. We added some money back in, about $500 million into the general fund. We've got some one-time funds in there that Snyder pushed very hard for one-time spending. Remember, if you haven't invested in your computer system in 30 years, you got a problem. So he was adamant about the computer system, about some other things that we needed to start investing in. Major GP reductions in 2011-12. Total of about $1.2 billion we took out of the budget. 15% reduction in higher ed, about $220 million. School aid fund, we shifted costs to the school aid fund. The Democrats were very upset about that we were using general fund money, or excuse me, we were using school aid fund money for higher ed. And we were taking that and beefing up the general fund a little bit and using it for higher ed. They said that shouldn't be. Well, if you look at past, one of the first slides I showed you on the school aid fund, we saw where the general fund has been contributing to the school aid fund for years. That was okay. When you go the other way, the teaching community wasn't real hot on that. Community college is a 4% reduction, and then a contribution to the school aid fund of $195. Revenue sharing, I'm going to talk about that again. $121 million cut. Corrections, $134 million cut. Human services, put the 48-month time limit on certain welfare cases. We cut out $118 million. Community health, GME is graduate medical education. CMH, non-Medicaid, $80 million. And across other departments, $43 million. For a total.
Community mental health?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, I love this slide. This shows where we spend general fund. Now, if you take state police and start there, work your way counterclockwise, all the way to community health, you've got $300 million, $1.9 billion in corrections, $1 billion in human services, and $2.8 billion in community health. You've got 68% of the budget, general fund budget. Take higher ed, community ed, or higher ed and community colleges, school aid, you've got another 17%, debt service of 4%, and then you've got this piece called the other. That's your bureaucracy. Those are buildings and people in a lot of respects. That's the rest of the government. So when we talk about making cuts, we'd love to make more cuts, and we will. I mean, I showed you that our budget is $2.5 billion lower than the governor's. But it's hard to make it out of that thing we call bureaucracy that we all hate so much, because that's 11%. But if we're going to make cuts, it's going to come out of services. It's going to come out of that 68%, or it's going to come out of schools. Okay, when I gave this presentation last Wednesday to our House Republicans, this came up as, restricted funds. We talk about restricted funds all, it's not general fund, it's not federal fund. What is it? Well, this is where it goes. School aid fund is by far the lion's share of it. It's almost $11 billion. You got higher ed. We about $400 million to higher ed and community colleges. Revenue sharing of $1 billion. Transportation, $2.1 billion. Community health. And then you've got a lot of kind of fee-for-service stuff over here with the DEQ, DNR, licensing and reg, treasury operations. That's what adds up to your $48 billion. Universities, state appropriations, you can see pretty steady, really. I mean, we've dropped but overall pretty steady since 2004. Big drops in 12 and 13, backfilled by school aid fund in those 2 years. I'm going through these fast. I know I'm on a short leash here. I did this for an hour and a half with our guys last Wednesday. Community colleges. Community colleges, pretty flat funding. You know, a few dips and valleys and a few peaks here. But you see 2008, backfilled with school aid appropriations, school aid fund, backfilled in 12 and 13. The dark line is enrollment. I love this slide too. This shows when your townships and your cities and counties are complaining, this is what they're complaining about. Revenue sharing. Back here, pretty much 50-50 on revenue sharing between constitutional and statutory. The top one is constitutional. Constitutional stayed pretty flat, but pretty even. But the statutory, the dark, has dropped to about 1/3 of what it was in 2001. So when we talk about road funding, when we talk about local services, police officers, things like that, and your locals are complaining, you know, they've seen a drop in revenue sharing. And, you know, when I ran back in 2008, I said, personally, I believe that I'd rather see money spent locally. They can spend it better at City Hall than they can in Lansing. And that's one thing that I kind of regret is that we've seen a real drop in this. Okay, classified employees. We picked the Department of Corrections because frankly I know more about that than the other departments. And it has the lion's share of our employees. It has about 1/3 of our overall employees, just in the Department of Corrections. We peaked in 2001, I don't have anything more older than that, at about 18,000 employees. We're down to about 13,500. This shows a little more than about 13,500. So the department has been making cuts. Now this is a little tougher, because this is the same department with personnel costs. It isn't consistent with the employees being cut. Our salaries, the bottom line, is pretty flat. I mean, we see a jump here in 2008 in salaries. 2007 was our record as far as number of prisoners in prison. And we started closing prisons really through that decade, but we had 51,000 prisoners in 2007. It's down to about 43 and change right now. But you see the salaries peak in 2008. What's tougher is this dark blue and the hash blue up on top. You've got fringe benefits and retirement. Those got out of whack. Again, peaked in 2008. Now, we've been making progress since then. We've got a director that I work very closely with. He's been on the job for about 1.5 years. He's actually cut close to $250 million out of that department. It doesn't register. It doesn't show, partly because of our retirement costs and partly because of OPEB. And like I said, I love that one up on top there. I think that's going to be on every slide from now on in the legislature because it shows that we're pre-funded. We're paying our bills instead of letting them accrue. So, you know, when you pay your mortgage quicker, you don't have as much in your checking account, but you're still doing the right thing. So I will continue to say that we did the right thing on that, and I think it's going to help your kids, your grandkids, and mine too. Okay, Medicaid expenditures. You can see the caseload line. You see the federal funds here. That's, Michael pointed out, I mean, that has gotten out of whack. You look at the bottom, general fund, pretty steady. We've done a pretty good job of holding our local or our state funds steady. The blue, well, yeah, I guess that's blue, is other Michigan match money, the money that we had to contribute to get this federal fund. You see a little blip there with the ARA funds that help keep the Michigan match down because of the ARA funds. The one bright spot in this is that we did not go, cost has not gone up faster than the population of our Medicaid people. It followed this curve. I got four more. Mental health funding. This one bothers me. I'm not big on spending, but I think this is the place that we need investment. You can see we peaked in about 2008. We've gone down steadily. Now, when Connecticut had its shooting, and we were all concerned about gun control, what did our side say? What did we as conservatives say? It's not a gun problem.
Nope. It's
What
a
is
mental
it?
problem.
It's a mental health problem. So, if we're serious, I think there are areas where we have to say, okay, I'm willing to spend more. Not everywhere. I still would rather cut than add money. But I think in this area, we've got to get serious about things. Human services funding. There again, public assistance on the bottom here, doing pretty well on that. Partly because of the 48-month time limit we put on benefits. The middle line here that's expanded, that's really your county personnel that have been added for programming. This is child welfare, pretty steady, and this gray area up here, very steady. That's your Lansing bureaucracy up there. Okay, this is a good slide, and I'm going to disagree with Michael on his slide. He had 64,000 employees in state government. I only have 48,000. We're here at about 62 back in 2001. And Michael, I respect your opinion, but I know the people that put this together. They're a lot smarter than me. They know them. They know the numbers. We were at 62 back in 2001, steady drop to about 48,000. There again, I think that's a good thing. As long as it doesn't get to a point where we can't do services anymore, or we are choosing those services that don't need to be done, then we can continue to get rid of people. But you can't do this line and expect the same forever. Where did those cuts come from? This is just for 2012, from 2010 to 2012. You can see corrections, about a 12% drop. DCH, 20% plus. LIRA, 20-some%. DEQ, 15%. Why did DHS go up? Well, DHS went up about 12% because we had a court case that said we had to add people. We had a ratio that, to take care of certain child welfare cases, we had to add staff. And then we got this little blip in Treasury, about 2% increase in Treasury. Well, two things happened under the Snyder administration. We implemented a new tax called the CIT, got rid of the MBT. They ramped up a little bit to know how to do that. And also, we changed the pension tax. So that's why you see the increases there.
I think this one. Don't worry, Joe, I'll yield some of my time.
All right, thank you, sir.
We have the chairman of the folks here. He can speak
All right.
much more valuable than I.
Now these increases that you see here, are between 11 and 12 to 12 and 13 budgets. And these are what the governor would call his investments into a better Michigan, into a reinvented Michigan. Michigan Strategic Fund, business traction, economic gardening, he added $75 million. These are the kind of negotiations that go on at the end of the budget cycle, after the committees are all done, and the three legs of the stool are in one room, and somebody says, I want this, well, I want that. Okay, I'll give you that if you give me this. That's the kind of negotiations that happen. I talked about technology, $47 million into technology. Law enforcement enhancements, $27 million. The governor is very concerned about the public enforcement in the four cities, Saginaw, Flint, Pontiac, and Detroit. Film incentives, you guys all love that one, $25 million. Autism, maintenance of state facilities. We're the worst neighbor in the world. I'll tell you, I can get complaints time and time again about closed down buildings, closed down prisons in neighborhoods that we don't take care of. So the governor finally asked for more money to put into maintenance of facilities. Frankly, I think if they're sitting empty, we ought to be putting them back on the tax rolls, let the private sector take them, and start paying property taxes on them, get them off the books. Total of about $285 million. Okay, real quick on the strategic fund things, if we're looking for cuts, you know, those are logical ones. 75 million out of the strategic fund, 25 million out of film incentives, you got $100 million. You start putting that toward roads. That's the low-hanging fruit. But it's not real money yet. I heard you're talking real money. You know, I know I've been there too long. When I start saying millions aren't real money yet, but you get accustomed to that when you're talking about that many zeros after a while. That's the low-hanging fruit. After that, remember the 68% out of services. Then you got to start cutting real things that affect people. So, as I said, Governor came out with a $50.8 billion budget. The House, the first crack at it we had, is just over $48 billion. We have a few holes that we have to plug in, okay? If we don't do road funding, we have to come up with $100 million. Okay, so what we just saved here is gone. Okay, that's our match just to get the minimum road funding from the federal government. We have something called Low-Income Energy Assistance Fund that was funded in the past. It no longer is. We got a $60 million hole. I can't say that with the press here, but we have a way of talking about that fund. That's an important thing. That you know, it really is an important thing for low-income people that cannot pay their heat bills. So $60 million there. We have $65 million for the next 3 years. We owe the federal government for what we call DISH. It stands for Federal Site Hospital Disallowance. Now, when Michael was talking about, you know, the strings attached, well, we were spending money in previous years on site services that the federal government finally slapped their hand and said, listen, you can't take our money and then give it back to us as your match. That's not allowed. So we owe the federal government $195 million. That's a hole in the budget that I've got to figure out where it's coming from. PICA tax, health insurance claims assessment. We did that a year and a half ago, again for a federal match. We're going to collect $400 million. This was a claims tax on your health insurance premium, or on your health insurance claims. Okay, we're $130 million short. We were worried it was going to collect too much. We put a $400 million cap on it, so we couldn't collect more than that. We're $130 million short. We've got about $400 million in problems right now in our budget that we've got to figure out between now and, well, it'd be nice to have it done by June 1. And that's where you're seeing some of the pressure come on the road funding issue. Now, the Medicaid expansion, frankly, I think it's a done deal. I don't see it happening. But that would have allowed us to buy down the general fund for about $206 million and put that towards something else. So the governor's proposal allocated for Medicaid expansion, use that $200 million for general fund, and do the road tax. That saves us $100 million that we have to send to Washington. And now we have to figure out where we're going to, if we don't do the road funding, where we're going to get that from. So I'm going to stop there. I could go for a while, but I know you were.
Are you going to save all the questions for the
Yeah.
I do want to say we put $500 million in the budget stabilization fund. That gets a little sticky sometimes. Some people think we ought to be spending it. I'm an advocate for growing, steady growth in the budget stabilization fund. You just saw the governor and the budget director come back from Wall Street, upgraded our bond rating. That is good for all of us. We borrow money at less. We have a better credibility in the country when our businesses look at that and when they want to relocate. So, thank you.
Now turn the microphone over to Amanda Price. She is my legislator, so pay real close attention to what she says.
Thank you. I just want to start with a caveat though. I am not on appropriations. And that makes a world of difference because those guys live in those numbers for months on end, and then they have to brief the policy side of the legislature, and we can't do riffs on numbers like they can, so. I wanted to show you this slide because I think it's really important for you. This talks about transportation funding. So when I was talking to Michael about this meeting a little bit earlier, a lot of people say, well, just take money out of this budget and we'll slide it over there. And it's really important that you understand how money comes in for transportation funding. So the black part of this pie is licenses, permits, and miscellaneous. So that's 31% of the transportation funding that comes in. The yellow, yellow over here, or green, whatever color that happens to be. Oh, that one. Okay, oh, there it is. This green one, that's the gas tax, 24.9%. We go down here, federal funds. That's, I think it's almost 37% of the money that comes in. And then we have a little bit for the state aviation fuel and the state motor, diesel and motor carrier fuel tax. So that's how the money comes into the state as we're looking at transportation. And then, so now, I just have to take you up. And then this is how the monies are distributed. So, and again, sorry, can't see this on this slide here. 87% of the monies go to the Michigan Transportation Fund. There's a comprehensive transportation fund, a state aeronautics fund, state trunk line fund, and Blue Water Bridge fund. So that makes up, just the small amount, the 12% left. And why I think this is important for you to understand is that, again, these things come with strings. I didn't have an opportunity to get this slide up there. Where did I put that? Oh, here it is. Oh, here it is. Just a second. You will. This is the appropriation of federal aid to Michigan. So I'm just going to walk this around. So you can see all the categories up here, and then all the monies that come down and flow through. And you are very much strung in by the types of money that comes through from the federal government to the state. And so you think that there's a lot of flexibility. I don't think it is. I don't think it is.
Even if you see it clearer, it won't.
No. Just to give you a sense. Yeah, it's very confusing. And I will just read the top line categories. The bridge fund, interstate maintenance, national highway system, surface transportation, congestion mitigation, air quality, highway safety improvement, rail highway safety, coordinated border infrastructure, safe routes to schools, state planning and research, metro planning, recreational trails, equity bonus, and then appropriations earmark. So we have not a lot of say in all of the money that comes in or how it gets spent. And that's the piece I wanted to share with you on the transportation piece.
Are those matching funds set things up? I mean, they dedicate this money for these projects. Do we have to match those funds then, or?
In some cases. And we have, the last few years, I think, transportation funding, we've had to come up with some money for match, or else we wouldn't have been able to pull down.
Right,
some of
and
that.
that's what we're facing this year, too.
Yeah.
Next one.
So we have to, the amount of revenue that we're projecting coming in isn't what we need according to the federal government, so we might have to take it from other pots of money
So we have to put our hands in the mousetrap.
or take money from, I guess, general fund.
Yeah, let's talk about,
Mike, are we gonna take questions at the end, or?
Yeah, and I will be brief on my presentation.
Why don't we wait and take questions at the end?
So, and this is a note I just keep with me. So now, 6% of our sales tax. So people think that a lot of our sales tax goes to transportation funding when we pay money on the gas. 6% of our sales tax, 60%, so these are confusing. 60% of the first 4 cents of your sales tax goes to education. 100% of the remaining 2 cents are dedicated to education.
How did home education?
Well, 60% of the first 4 cents. So remember, we used to have 4 cent sales tax.
Like 4 cents, okay.
Yeah. So that's so much money goes to education funding that we can't really switch this around on the sales tax.
Only 25% graduate from the state, and the rest can't read English.
Hold your question.
Sorry. Observation there.
Yeah.
That was a good.
Thank you very much. As you can tell, there's been some questions. Right.
Half of it.
First we give Roger and
No, actually, Michael, I'm going to be fairly brief because when we have the chairman of the PATRIOTS at this meeting, which I think we should all be privileged to have a inside knowledge of there, I'm not going to upstage that person. So again, I yielded my time to the good Representative Joe Hodgman, and I was serious on that there too. I wanted to have that presentation because that's the same presentation that we received at caucus and among all the representatives there, so the Republican Party. So again, I appreciate you down there. And also, Joe, the work that you've done in corporations. And I also want to thank those who are the chairs of those subcommittees too. What a lot of heavy lifting they have done, and they've been working hard on it and getting this budget out in time, which is so critical because our our schools, they need to know where they're going to be moving ahead in this during this coming year and set their budgets. You can't do that in October or November. And that was the old way when we did things in the state. And there's a new order in town, and Representative Joe Hodgman is a part of that new order. So thank you very much. One item Joe took a little bit of my thunder away. I was going to highlight that $20 billion reduction to liability. And some of that was OPEB too. I serve on the Financial Liability Reform Committee. I vice chair that committee. And this is a committee that we're digging in. And our purpose of this committee is to build that balance sheet of the state of Michigan. When we build a solid balance sheet of the state of Michigan, again, as Joe highlighted, our bond ratings improve, our cost of borrowing money is less, and that translates direct savings to the hardworking men and women, taxpayers of the state of Michigan. So that's where I feel adamant on that process. I'm a small business owner. I know what it means to have a solid balance sheet, and that's what we're going to be working on that process. And one caveat in the budget, EHS, Department of Human Services. We saw on the chart how that has increased employment, but they're looking at cutting that part of the budget out and actually eliminating 1,000 positions for employees. And that's going to carve in, and there will be some, that's going to hurt a little bit, but by eliminating those 1,000 employees, there again, it has a long-lasting effect because it will affect OPEB and all these other obligations that we will have to be obligated in the future on, and we can clean that out, and as Joe indicated too, and Amanda, this is going to build a better foundation for our children in the state. When you start running these numbers, it's amazing how we're active, we're being progressive at it. This state will grow, and this will be a prosperous state. And you look at states who's taking the other approach, Illinois. I question what we're going to do with that state. This might have to shove it in with Lake Michigan eventually because they're doing the complete opposite of what we're doing in the state of Michigan. It's alarming. So that's where I'm going to leave it at that. I get that. Exactly. Well, I hope we don't acquire it because then we have to take on those unfunded liabilities that we've cleaned our house in order. And it's kind of like I'm an avid listener of Dave Ramsey. And Dave Ramsey said too, one of the key things you need to build an emergency fund. And that's where the Governor Snyder has done too, because when you have the emergency fund there, you can manage your household in a better order, and that's where we can do the same as a state. So at this point in time, I think we got a lot of good questions out here, and we had a great presentation by our chairman of PATRIOTS, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Before we do the question part of the session, I want to remind all of us that at about 8 o'clock or so, which is about 15 minutes from now, I'm going to ask each of the legislators to share with us in 1 or 2 minutes, and that includes you, Joe, this time, 1 or 2 minutes. What you've learned from what you have.
I yield my time to Joe.
Not on this part, Roger, you can't do it. I'd like for us to hear from you what you've gained from this exchange today, what you've learned from the questions that you're going to get, okay? I think that kind of feedback is useful. Now, something that I did not know, which Joe and Amanda and Roger have all emphasized, is that what Joe shared with us today, his perspective on the coming budget, is the same one that he shared with all the legislators, Republican legislators, in Lansing earlier this week, yesterday or last Wednesday. And I can, that normally does not happen. All right, so those of you in the room here got privileged information, so to speak. Now, I happen to think it should happen regularly, and maybe it'll begin to move us towards asking more questions. So now we go to the question part, and I'm going to go around the room as people raise their hands and allow you to direct questions. If they become lopsided, I'm going to ask questions, ask you to direct questions to individuals, particular individuals, but right now we'll start it out free-form. I know Roger in the back had a question. I'll get to you in a moment, Ken, but Roger had a question that he wanted to ask, so I'm going to start with you, Roger, and you could stand up, introduce yourself, and then direct your questions.
Do I still have to raise my hand, or can I just step going?
Well, I already knew you gave it to me, so I have these questions here that people gave me, so I want to start with you.
So, Roger Kuhn from Park Township here in Holland, and I think one of the questions that I'd like to hear answered, it really is related to, I guess, the pending healthcare challenges that we're going to have, specifically around, given the constitutional and religious impact from the Health and Human Services mandate, what we're doing in Michigan to really stand against that. What can we do? What have we done? Are we going to be joining other states in legal battle? I mean, that sort of thing. So that's really something on my mind. But thank you.
Did you direct that to one of them or all?
Whoever's most equipped to answer it, I guess.
And I'm assuming you're talking about what we call Obamacare.
Right.
So just to give you the historical perspective, the Senate last year, there were 3 options, basically. 3 options for a state to choose. You could have a state exchange, which you would end up setting up something similar to kayak. If you go on, kayak to go to travel or something similar to that, so you can go out and pick out what kind of health care plan you want. You could do, there would be a federal option, which is almost the default option, and then there would be a state federal partnership. Last spring, the state Senate passed the partnership, the state exchange. The House then got that legislation, and we were very adamant that we wanted to wait for the result of the Sebelius lawsuit at the Supreme Court level. We did win, unfortunately. We were then very adamant that we were going to wait for the results of the presidential election. We did not win that. And then it became a choice. Now the state partnership, by that time, the state exchange now is off the table because the governor said we didn't have the amount of time we needed to put in place all of the IT infrastructure. So we're now down to the state partnership exchange or the federal exchange. Earlier this year, we passed as a House the state-federal exchange for the reason that we thought, well, some of us that voted for it, because I think Roger voted against it, thought that we would have a modicum more control over what we would implement in the state than if the federal government was going to come in and implement. We passed that. It was a close vote. Went over to the Senate. The Senate has not been moved. And I do not know what is happening on that at this point. So I would assume that it's because they have not moved on what we sent them, that, and because their bill that they sent us last year has since died, that we're kind of stuck, and we probably will default to that federal
everybody hear that?
No, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, he wants to know what are the ramifications in terms of cost, taxes, so forth, with the 2 or 3 options.
That's a good question. I'm not sure if I feel prepared because I just think.
Well, Fed's going to be a big contributor initially, but then it all falls back on the states at some point. That's when it gets expensive. We pay more either in our federal taxes or our state taxes.
But this was setting up.
We've already contributed, businesses have already contributed about $90 million to Washington. So basically, we're not getting anything back. Now, the immediate part of my House bill that wanted to do the state-federal partnership, which was the middle program, not as good as a state exchange, but far better than a federal exchange, in my opinion, is we would have gotten about $31 million back from Washington. Now, we sent it. Okay, now, that was my purpose of supporting it was because of the control more than the 30 million. But without it, we do have to come up with about another 8 or 9 million of general fund money that for the computerization of this. Okay, we still have requirements from the federal government that we're obligated to do, and you know, there's going to be general fund money, we call it machine money, that's going to have to pay for that instead of getting that grant from the federal government.
Another question, on unemployment insurance. Okay. And when you're a business, you pay employment insurance. But how underfunded is that bill? The business pays for that.
All right, let me repeat that question. The question is the unemployment insurance fund underfunded, and if so, by how much? Now that's a tax that businesses pay per capita, per employee, based on the number of people that they employ. All right, so the question is if they're underfunded. All right, Joe, go ahead. But after that, I want to go back to Roger's question, because Roger, I thought, should have an opportunity to answer that as well. So.
Unemployment insurance, we fixed it last term. It is underfunded. I believe the amount is about $3 billion. That's a debt that we have to the federal government just for unemployment insurance. We went out, and with that debt came a lot of strings attached and a lot of penalties that we had to pay the federal government. We went out and we bonded for that amount. So we got the federal government debt rid of that. We have a bond debt that we can pay for that is less than what we were paying the federal government. Okay, we still have a debt. We are still underfunded. We're going to be paying that a long time. And those of you in business probably saw your rate go up a little bit, and you said, "What? What are you doing to us? Snyder, hey, Republicans, what did you do? You made this change, and my rate went up." That rate would have gone up substantially more had we stayed with the federal government and their debt.
And this is kind of anecdotal, but last year in the bond world rated this bond as the best bond in the country because what we did to lower that debt. That's what the government.
And I want to go back. Roger's first question had to do with the exchanges and Medicare. And I want to follow up if he doesn't answer all of it. But Roger, since you did vote differently than Amanda and Joe on that, maybe you'd like to share a little on the vote to make a state-federal partnership exchange. Right? Amanda and Joe voted for that. And Joe and Amanda voted for it, and Roger voted against it.
Well, Joe brought a good point of view to the table on that there too. My no vote came out of the concern is, again, the sustainability of the federal funds and how we put our hook in our mouth in the federal area. But with that there, we do pay a price. And now, probably by making that vote, I made a statement that we don't want to tie it to those federal funds, but then we do relinquish some of our control. So Joe had a valid point there. It goes hand in hand. So.
Well, what control did you want?
Well, by dictating. Now we're going to have a Washington mandate.
Yeah, let me elaborate that for a little bit. Amanda used the analogy of Kayak or Expedia. Okay, the websites where you go to book a hotel. That's what the exchange is like, sorta. Okay. Now, clearly, not every hotel is represented on Expedia. Some hotels have a preferential treatment by Expedia. And when you have a state-run or a state partnership-run exchange, you're going to have a preferential treatment for the Michigan hotels in Michigan. Okay, so that's the kind of.
So now,
I just want to elaborate. Now, there were 5 questions before. Dave, Ken.
Yes, I would like to know from any one of you that can answer it, how much percentage of the federal funds that we're receiving in grant money are we having to match with Michigan funds overall? Because there are a few that, for instance, let me give you an example. The windmills we have in the state are questionable whether they're doing any good. And I heard a figure of $12 billion being coming into the state of Michigan from the federal government for windmills. Are we putting up any Michigan money for them?
12 billion?
12 billion.
I have
Over
not.
the next 10 years, I believe that is.
I don't know the answer. I don't even begin to know the answer. I mean, your question, Ken, is to what degree does the state have to match the money coming from the federal grants?
Right. And my follow-up to start with is, if we have to match that money and we don't have it to begin with, why are we taking that money?
No, I can't address that directly, Ken, but some of these grants are proportionally different. And the federal government has been very generous on some of these alternative energies, which I would agree or disagree with it, comparable to some of these other funds, because there was a certain initiative in the Obama administration to push the green energy. And we have an example of that throughout the state. So some of those grants were much more generous and comparable to the highway funding, which is, that goes to like a 50-50 match. So I couldn't tell you, but I would lean that example of windmills would probably work more heavily federal.
It really doesn't matter what we accept if we have to match it, because the federal government can print the money. They can print the money and give it to us. And then if we have to match it, we're paying for it again. So we're paying for it to them. They're printing more money. They're diluting their money. They're making it worthless. Every time they do that, they're doing it to the tune of $85 billion a month right now. So they're diluting their money. We're taking it, and then if we have to match it, we're all losing out on it.
Right, Jim, I have a question, but Jim, you go first. And then Paul.
With the exchange thing being pushed back to 2015 now, is that correct? There are questions that it may eventually still come through. And with in 2015, the bill that passed in the Senate can't be just revamped, because once it's going to pass the term, it's dead, right? Is that the correct question?
Yeah.
And I've heard arguments about, well, we have more control if it's a partnership. We have more control if it was a state. When the reality of is in the Obamacare, the HHS secretary says, we're going to do whatever we want. We're going to override the state, so what difference does it make?
That's right.
All right? And it's like, it was pushed back to 2015. Maybe it'll be pushed back to 2016. Maybe pushed back to the 12th of never. That would be, I'd be happy with that.
Paul, did you have a question?
Well, kind of adding on to what Jim was saying there, I was looking at some of the video interviews that Joe Hoffman and Arlie Meekhoff had done in March, and I got some, I found some very interesting comments with that. I keep hearing about the 3 different options we had. Well, what about the 4th option to actually nullify and take a stand like these other states were doing? I heard some other... I asked that because I heard, hang on one sec. I asked that because I heard, well, Arlen Meekhoff said in the last Ottawa County Executive Committee meeting that, oh, well, people told us not to do anything because the Supreme Court will strike it down, or don't do anything because we'll have a new president. Well, nobody was really telling you guys to not do anything. I believe there was quite a few people saying, hey, let's go out there, take a stand, and nullify like all these other states are doing. And Oklahoma actually did do something. So my question is, how come we're not actually working to nullify it like other states?
That's right.
Before I let him answer, since you brought up Arlen Luga, he would have liked to have been here this evening, but he is in Europe, trying to, pardon?
Netherlands.
In the Netherlands, trying to drum up investments there in Western Michigan. So he extends his regrets for not being here. Now, would any of you like to answer Paul's question? Why aren't we, as a legislature, as a state, pursuing additional means of nullifying the applicability of Obamacare in Michigan and doing that in partnership with other states that are undertaking to do that? Roger, do you want to start?
We've been dealt a bad set of cards up here, and I work off a process of, again, relying on these federal funds. That's where I make my decisions and work on processing it. It's not going to be another hook in our mouth and lead us down. There's also some sense of reality in here too, and the elections have results or consequences. President Obama was reelected, and he has 4 years in office, and this is some key mark legislative agenda he had, or his legacy, and so you're looking at how we're going to be able to push this off for 4 years. I question that.
That's right. Yeah, just say no.
Just say no.
Amanda, did you want to?
Yeah. Because remember, he's been reelected, and he has 4 years to hold on, which I don't agree with. But
what are the penalties if we just let the federal government do it?
Does Canada want to know the problems? Yeah. Joe, did you want to respond to?
We looked at nullification. Our attorneys looked at it. We discussed it. We were told it's not practical. Well, I was just telling you what was said. Now, if you take the opposite approach, and a state does, and I'm going to mess up my example here. There was an example given on gun control, but and I apologize, I'm not remembering it. But if we nullify, would you want to? What if a state did strict gun control?
Well, like New York.
Yeah.
We moved.
I mean, would you? I mean, can they just nullify the Constitution? They're just going to say no to the Constitution? Or do you want the Supreme Court to stand up and say, no, the Constitution is true, we have gun rights? Well,
Michigan, everybody's clamoring about this is a tax. Well, gay industry tax, we're talking about an ammunition tax, but Michigan already has had registration forever.
Well, let's take it a far extreme. If a state comes and starts to take away guns, and nullifies the Constitution, should they have the right to do that?
No.
I don't think they should.
No.
That's kind of my point. Should we have the right to nullify the
There's a difference between, hang on, can I
Obamacare isn't in the Constitution.
Yeah, Obamacare is not in the Constitution, that's different from
Maintain
section.
modicum of control over the dialogue. Right. Joe.
The exchange is debt. And we can talk about it all night, but the exchange is debt. The federal government is moving ahead with its exchange.
Okay, I'd like to ask a related question.
The whole thing then? So they're going to take over all the...
Carl. This is my meeting. I have a question, a related question. I want to move past the exchanges for a moment, whether or not states can nullify it. And that's another question that the state legislature has to grapple with. The governor has recommended raising the threshold for Medicaid eligibility in Michigan. Okay, and that, with that recommendation is one that was encouraged by the Obama administration. Okay, and that encouragement came with billions and billions of potential additional dollars from the federal government. Now that
Government has no money.
let's all pretend. So my question is, where do each of you believe the House will come down on that request to increase the threshold for eligibility for Medicaid assistance from the state of Michigan? Right? The proposal is basically, as I understand it, to raise it to 160% of the federal poverty level. And if an individual is earning that or less, they become eligible for Medicaid funds.
Hey Mike, so that'd be, just to clarify, that'd be lowering the threshold because they're going to expand the number of
they're actually raising the threshold for eligibility.
Yeah.
Okay. So whatever the poverty threshold is now for a household of four, what is it, I think it's 26,000. Anyway, they're going to raise it to 160% of that. So it's whatever that whatever. So all of those households become eligible for Medicaid funding from the state of Michigan. Okay. So my question is, do you believe that the House will go along with that recommendation from Governor Snyder, or leave the threshold where it is, or lower it? Roger, you want?
Yeah, I'll start. Looking at this here, I don't have a lot of buy into this, but the Chamber has brought in some a different point of view of this, and the Chamber has highlighted that this may be an opportunity for us to reform Medicaid. And I think we need to explore that as our attention too. So if we're going to move any in this direction, what type of reform can be conducted? Is there savings in there to offset some of these other increased costs in the process, and explore that opportunity? But initially, again, it goes back to my belief is I've got to be so careful with these federal dollars and the state ability of federal dollars, and we know what's happening at the federal level, sequestration. You know, this money was being yanked out. But there again, this may be an opportunity for us to do some reform with Medicaid. So I gave the Chamber a listening ear on it, and I'm going to dig into this a little more.
Amanda?
Well, you know, it wasn't something that the Obama administration so much said is that Supreme Court opened this up as a possibility for Medicaid expansion. And so states could do this as a result of that ruling last year. The governor looked at the cost of expanding Medicaid to a certain population. Now, I agree with Roger. I think there is cost savings and reforms that we need to do. And if we're going to do this, and I'm not inclined to open up 400,000 more people to Medicaid, because I look at myself and I say, okay, how am I managing my own health care? Am I keeping my weight under control? Am I getting to the doctor's appointments? I'm getting my meds. Am I taking my meds every day? And I have not great health care, but I have health care. So you go to a population of folks who haven't had as good a health care and have relied on emergency services, emergency rooms for health care. And it's a great leap for me to say that we're going to experience great cost savings when we open up Medicaid to that population. Now, there is some talk in the approach subcommittees of going for a waiver, and that would allow us to ask the federal government to implement this in a manner that we think is fiscally sound. So, for instance, rather than going to the emergency room for your toe problem,
did it well. That is the dilemma we have. We're not going to move on this. I think it has a better than, maybe a 10% chance of moving forward right now. It will not be done by June when we're in budget, so if it does happen, it's going to be after that. And we need a heck of a lot of answers from the federal government as to what we would be allowed to do. I highlighted in my proposal, and we have a stereotype, I think, of Medicaid funds must be the single mom who's has kids to get more aid and lives in downtown Flint, and all the negative stereotypes that you want to have about Medicaid people. I'd like to tell you a story about 3 boys that are just like my kids. One is a kid who had schizophrenia all his life and went to prison when he was 14 years old. He's 21 now. He's finally out, but is going through, frankly, he went through hell in prison. As a juvenile, he went to adult prison. A better solution would have been something around health care. I can tell you about a friend who I went to church with as a kid. One of my brother's best friends has a son with schizophrenia, went in for a 17-month sentence, minimum sentence. He will max out next year at 15 years because our corrections department didn't do anything to correct his behavior or to deal with his mental illness. I have another friend from Holland who is a business owner. He is just like you and I, with a 25, 26-year-old son who is just like your kids, who fell in the bathtub and has a closed head injury, and that kid will never be the same. And except for a relentless father trying to find out everything he could do for this kid, he finally found a solution in Ann Arbor that he can maybe get some help for him. His son, too, will end up in our corrections department. Now, the positive side, if we move forward, like Amanda said, it's something that Michigan can control, is there's $25 million that will go into our corrections department to deal with mental health issues. About 20% of our prisoners, we believe, have some kind of mental illness. We pay $35,000 a year to keep them. We warehouse them. We do very little to correct people. There's little programs that we're involved in that help. But as a whole, we don't know how to deal with our prisoners and get them back into society where they're paying taxes and not sucking taxes. So,
I have, 1 second, Linda. I have questions from Paul and Jim. No. Linda, you haven't asked a question, so I'd like you.
I just want to say, Joe, we closed, but I'm a psychologist, we closed mental health institutions a number of years ago. There's a reason that we are where we are.
Oh, you're absolutely right.
That's the problem.
Linda, it's my second cousin that was the community health director under John Engler. He's back under Snyder. He believes he did the right thing and he was going to send those back into the community. He claims Brandon screwed it up when she got there, and he could have had a good plan. So I'm glad.
I don't think so. I think we needed to not close Kalamazoo. We
that
needed
could be.
to not
You may very well be right.
But the thing I wanted to say is, okay with you, Mike. It looks like there's a potential that Obamacare may fold in on itself.
You're right.
There are 22,000 pages of regulations, 7 feet tall. Why are we getting involved? Why are we not waiting? And why not let them implode? And hopefully, this is my own private wish, hopefully it'll happen at the time of the next election so that all the people who are running, such as Bill Heisinger, will be able to be reelected again.
Well, as I said, I think that's probably what's going to happen. I see maybe a 10 to 20% chance that we pass the expansion. If we do it, as Amanda so articulately said, there's going to be a whole lot of strings attached from us saying we will do it under these circumstances.
But we got another problem. Where are we going to get the doctors? Where are we going to get the doctors? You know what's happening right now? They're dumbing down health care. Yeah. Now, I don't mean to be critical of PAs and so forth, but you have to know to get in to see a doctor, people don't even understand there's a difference. They make a doctor's appointment, they end up seeing a PA, they don't get to see the doctor. The doctor is buried under paperwork. We have got a problem and it is bigger than money. And we may set up exactly what you guys are saying. There won't be any providers. There won't be physicians. What physician wants 22,000 pages of regulation? Who here is going to encourage your son, your daughter to go into medicine? We've got a problem.
Well said.
Full disclosure, you know, you have a little family involvement in medical.
I know mental health and we know medicine. But you know what, Roger? Those are the people you guys need to be talking to. And those of us who provide the service are the guys on the street.
That's right.
We are the people you need to be talking to.
Right.
You know, that kind of knowledge is in many circles called expertise.
Wow, Mike, you're great.
Before, I'm sorry, no, not you, Jim. This beautiful woman in front of you. Can you identify yourself?
My name is T. Jackson Dufford, and I am from Grand Haven. And my area of expertise is I've spent the last 6 years as a court-appointed receiver. And it goes back to your UIA question earlier. In the last 6 years, I've probably done business discontinuations, a little over 200 businesses. I can get the Internal Revenue Service to pull a plug on a business, but I fight with the state of Michigan for 2 and 3 years because the license and regulation doesn't talk to Treasury, and I get failure to file, failure to report, get all kinds of different imputed incomes, and I spend hundreds of thousands of dollars following up on dead businesses that are 4 or 5 years old. And if we can't even get a business, it should be very simple. And I'm sure your technology is starting to go towards addressing those things, but it scares the Jesus out of me to think that you guys are going to be doing my health care. Because I wonder if I can't. I just wonder if those numbers are used to inflate budgets. You have a lot of accounts receivable, speaking as an accountant for the last 30 years, on your books that are never going to come through because those businesses are dead. Furthermore, UIA exacerbates my problem because I'm the time that I actually sell the asset and somebody else is now owning that business. Because of successor liability, what should be a viable business is driven out of business within the first 2 years because they inherit 13 and 14% successor liabilities. They can't make it.
Right.
So,
Paul, you mentioned Treasury. Do you have frustration with Treasury? Because it's, we call it the new DEQ.
Actually, they pick up their, Treasury Collections picks up their phone.
Okay, dude. Okay.
And I get to talk to kids on a regular basis.
Okay.
Your people over in Detroit at UIA Collections, forget it. You cannot get through.
I've had a lot of issues, especially with a lot of CPAs contacting me. They implemented some new software third quarter last year, and that's when everything went crazy in UIA. And I've had meetings, at least 2 meetings with the department on how to correct it, and what they seem to do is they'll take my issues, my constituent issues, and they'll fix those. And you don't think about everybody else who's calling the department over and over and over again, and then getting these notices that you go out some liability, and then you try to call them back and you can't get through. And they do have, last week the governor put in a new director, and that person better get up to speed real.
When I saw your reduction in Lara, I thought, well, that makes a heck of a lot of sense. Can you maybe get 4 or 5 people to answer the phone?
Well, and then in order to deal with some of the UIA stuff, they actually pulled people off layoff to come back to the to deal with some of this stuff.
I just think maybe if departments talk to each other, it would really help.
Okay, Paul, we go back to Paul's question.
Okay. Well, my first part's just a little bit of pretext to get to my question, but I find it kind of troubling that on March 22nd, this is going back to the actual fundamentals. Let's stop exchanges, but I'll get to that. On March 22nd, Joe Hoffman was in an interview where on the radio where he actually said that every argument heard against a state-federal partnership was a political argument, not about what's best for Michigan, which I hope after what's happened today, that's changed. First thing with that. I'm very troubled by the whole idea of it not being, nullification was about not being feasible, when essentially what you're doing is saying that, well, we're going to do this state-run exchange with a state-federal partnership to try and have some control. And you're talking about trying to have some control over this monstrous federal organization that can create regulation on a whim that just added 1,000 pages last month to Obamacare. So I think you're kind of trying to nullify it a little bit by saying, well, let's do this to have some control. So you're talking about nullification to some standpoint. So I find this whole lack of understanding of the Constitution kind of troubling, to say the least. But also my question would be, could you actually point to what amendment or what part of the Constitution authorizes Obamacare?
Right.
Anyone up there who's brave enough to
that was a legal
take
question.
that?
As I understand the question is, can you identify in the Constitution the basis for Obamacare?
Well, I guess it's Supreme Court did one.
Yeah. I would have to really make it to Supreme Court justices. I mean, the state representative. It did. Very creative.
So is the response the Supreme Court gave the authorization, is that the legal basis for Obamacare that you're basing this off of? Is that what you said, Ron?
I don't have an answer for you, Paul. It's been resolved. I mean, we're not going to go forward with the state exchange or the partnership exchange.
This is all about the actual basis for how you guys come to these decisions, because I'm hearing about, well, what if a state passes really tough gun control laws? The federal law is only applicable if it's made in pursuance to the Constitution, otherwise it's up to the states or to the people. That's the 10th Amendment. So I'm not just worried about the exchanges, I'm worried about the gun control bills and everything going forward. What are you guys using to base whether or not it's feasible to do some of these things? Like, how are you coming to these decisions? Because this is, more than just the exchanges.
I don't know how to answer you. We make, I think, very logical and reasoned decisions, and most of the time it's based on what is applicable law. And our attorneys are there. We have a great set of attorneys that are guiding us on a lot of this. And I guess I thought I came here to talk about the budget.
Well, this has a cost. This will impact the budget long term. All these things. You're talking about expanding Medicaid, so ultimately, how you make these decisions will impact the budget.
I have two more.
I'll let Jim.
I want to get some other questions. A question over here and a question from Steve. Could you identify yourself?
Yeah, my name is Ruth Dykens. I live in Park Township, and as representing the person on the street who constantly sees their budget being eroded, and you want to increase our taxes for roads, I would like to say to you, we have the second highest car insurance rates in the country. We are the second worst state to retire to since you implemented the tax on pensions and made the big tax shift of $1.2 billion. I'm just wondering why you can't say no to the governor. He got his bridge. Obama just said he could have it. He should be as happy as a bug in a rug, as they say. I would like to see you not raise taxes, and I know you want us to vote probably on raising the sales tax, and I would say no to that. We have 6%, which is plenty high, and 5 out of 50 states currently have a 7% sales tax, and I don't want to see Michigan go over. Thank you.
Well, one of my concerns with the road company is each year that's just have put hard-earned tax dollars in those roads. Just like you spent hard-earned money for the homeowners in this room, invested in their homes. The dilemma we have is our funding mechanism sits at a constant. And while asphalt costs increase, steel costs increase, these are realities we have. So it's like as you have your own home budgets, things have increased. But you do have to face at times, you have to put shingles on your house. If you don't put shingles on your home, what's the value of the house going to be? What is that investment that you've done in your house? What's that going to have returned? So, exactly, we have a challenge here. We have a static number, a defined tax base that's coming for our roads. And we've put hard-earned taxes. The hard-working men and women of the state of Michigan have, sacrificed and put their equity in those roads. How, as a small business owner, I analyze these things. How do we preserve that investment? That's a challenge I lay out. But I appreciate your points.
Can I ask you a question then? Can I just ask this question? How many people think the roads are in good shape?
I do want to bring the Georgetown Township and let's drive down Baldwin. The gateway is part of my district. I'm sorry, but yeah.
Excuse me, with that question, I need to reiterate, the governor said he wants to use all the money for state trunk lines, and he wants the counties, like the Ottawa County Road Commission, to also tax, put on a registration fee, not just at the state level, but at the local level. So you haven't seen the end of this. I say you need to tell him no. He got his birthday present last year,